Picture this for a second. A hand way too small to be holding what it's holding. Fingers wrapped around a microphone built for grown-up press conferences. And on the other end of that microphone sits a professional athlete who in 2 days will be walking out to face one of the toughest draws of her season. That's the image that kicked off a story most tennis fans almost scrolled right past. And honestly, if you did scroll past it, I don't blame you. Because on paper it looks like nothing more than a cute clip from a media day. A kid with a microphone. A smiling athlete. 30 seconds of content built for social media engagement. But stick with me here. Because once you start pulling at the thread of what actually happened in that room, and more importantly, what happened in the days surrounding it, you start to realize this tiny moment is sitting right at the emotional center of one of the most interesting stretches in a young tennis career happening right now. The player in question is 21-year-old Alex Eala, currently ranked 35th in the world. And the room she was sitting in belonged to the Berlin Tennis Open, a WTA 500 event stacked with 6 top 10 players. Names like Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, and Coco Gauff, all sharing the same draw sheet. Eala wasn't there because the rankings demanded it. She was there on a wild card, one of 4 handed out for the main draw. An invitation rather than an entitlement, which already tells you something about how the tour views her right now. And as part of the tournament's media day tradition, where young fans get paired up with a featured player to ask whatever's on their mind, a little girl sat down across from her. As it turns out, that little girl's name was also Alex. Not engineered. Not planned by any marketing team. Just one of those small coincidences that nobody could have scripted if they tried. The WTA social media team noticed it immediately and built the caption around it. Something like, "One Alex passing the microphone to another." And when the question came, it wasn't complicated. It wasn't probing. It was the kind of question only a child would think to ask. Why do you love tennis? And what came back wasn't a rehearsed soundbite. Eala answered that the sport makes her feel empowered, makes her feel confident, makes her feel strong. 3 words a kid could understand, delivered without the practiced polish of someone reaching for quote that plays well on camera. The clip went out on the 14th of June. And within a day, it had rippled out across tennis circles with a tone you don't usually see attached to tour content, something closer to genuine affection than analysis. Now here's where the story actually starts to widen. Because that single moment doesn't mean much in isolation. It's the timing around it that turns a sweet clip into something worth talking about. Rewind 8 days before that media day, back to the 7th of June, and you find Eala standing on a very different kind of stage. The winner's podium in Birmingham, having just claimed her second career WTA 125 title after grinding through a 3-set final against Nikola Bardunkova. That's a real accomplishment. The kind of trophy that builds momentum heading into bigger tournaments. But tennis has this brutal habit of not letting anyone enjoy a win for long. And just 3 days after lifting that trophy, on the 10th of June, Eala walked onto the grass at Queen's Club and ran straight into a teenage buzzsaw named Iva Jovic, who beat her in straight sets, 6-2, 6-2. A scoreline that doesn't leave much room for a silver lining. To make it sting more, this wasn't even the first time Jovic had done this to her. The American had already beaten Eala weeks earlier at the French Open, meaning the head-to-head between them now sat firmly in Jovic's favor across 2 different surfaces within the span of about a month. So within the space of 14 days, Eala experienced the full emotional range tennis can throw at a player. A championship high in Birmingham, followed by a lopsided, almost humbling defeat at Queen's. And then 4 days after that defeat, with barely enough time to process either feeling fully, she found herself sitting across from a child holding an oversized microphone, 2 days before facing another brutal test on court. That's the part that turns this from a cute social clip into something more layered. Because what you're actually watching when you watch that kid's press conference isn't just a tennis player being nice to a fan. You're watching someone choose warmth in the narrow window between a celebration and a wound. Someone who had every reason to show up guarded or distracted, and instead showed up present. Fully present. For a question that had nothing to do with rankings or match strategy. Now I know what some of you are already thinking because I thought it too when I first dug into this. A kid's press conference is at the end of the day a marketing exercise. Tours produce this kind of content because feel-good clips perform well. They're easy to share, easy to caption, easy to turn into engagement numbers. And that's a fair point. I won't pretend otherwise. Every media day appearance on tour carries some degree of stage management. Nobody's claiming this was some unscripted accidental glimpse behind the curtain. But here's the thing about engineered moments. Sometimes what actually shows through the engineering tells you more than the engineering itself was designed to reveal. The format may have been built by a marketing team, but the response wasn't handed to Eala on a script. A child asked a sincere question, and instead of deflecting it with the kind of polished non-answer athletes are trained to give, she met it on exactly the same emotional level it was asked on. That's not something you can manufacture in a production meeting. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about why Eala, even being in that wild card slot, matters as much as it does. She's sitting at a career-high adjacent ranking of 35th in the world, having peaked at 29 back in March after a strong run to the 4th round at Indian Wells. That's not a ranking that requires charity invitations. She could have entered a lower-tier tournament through direct acceptance and probably won it without much trouble. But the Berlin Open organizers specifically wanted her in their draw, wanted her name on their bracket, wanted her face in their media day lineup. And then on top of putting her on the court, they put her on a stool in front of children with cameras rolling. That's not just tournament logistics. That's a signal about how the tour currently views her drawing power, her appeal, her value as something beyond a ranking number. And then there's that small, almost throwaway detail that ended up being the emotional anchor of the entire clip. The fact that the questioners shared her name. The WTA social team didn't invent that symmetry. They just noticed it and let it carry the caption. Which means the most memorable, most shareable beat of the entire segment, a child named Alex asking a professional athlete named Alex why she loves the sport, wasn't something anyone planned. It was a gift the day handed them, and they were smart enough to recognize it. Now, why does the question itself land so hard? Because if you go back and listen to what Eala said just 8 days earlier, standing on that Birmingham podium holding an actual championship trophy, you hear a strikingly similar voice. After winning that final, she didn't lean into triumph the way you might expect from someone who just claimed silverware. Instead, she talked about how lifting that trophy didn't mean she'd already arrived among the greats, that it was simply motivation to keep working. Gratitude for what the win meant to her ongoing journey, rather than treating it as some kind of arrival point. That's not coronation language. That's not the language of someone treating a title as a finish line. It's continuation language. Motivation framed through humility. And it's the exact same disposition that showed up days later in front of a child holding a microphone too big for her hand. The kids' press conference didn't reveal some hidden softer version of Alex Eala that only comes out around children. It revealed the same person you saw on the podium, just under different lighting. And then 4 days after that Birmingham speech, that same humility met a much harsher test. The loss to Jovic at Queen's wasn't a close, hard-fought defeat she could spin into a moral victory. It was comprehensive, a player who had now beaten her twice in 2 months on 2 completely different surfaces. That's the kind of loss that lingers. The kind that follows an athlete off the court and sits with them for days. And Eala walked into that Berlin media room with that defeat still fresh, still raw, and chose not to let it bleed into the next interaction in front of her. For a 21-year-old on a tour that often rewards visible toughness and quietly punishes any hint of visible vulnerability, that's not a small thing. That's a deliberate choice, even if it wasn't consciously framed that way in a moment. And here's where the stakes ratchet up even further. Because the next opponent waiting for her wasn't a child with a simple question. It was Donna Vekic, an Olympic silver medalist from the 2024 Paris Games, a Wimbledon semi-finalist that same year, and as of 2 days before this matchup, the freshly crowned champion at Queen's Club, having run through that tournament as a lucky loser turned title winner. Their previous meeting had gone in Eala's favor back in January at the ASB Classic in Auckland, but that was on hard court. Berlin meant grass. An entirely different conversation. So map out the timeline here. Saturday, she's answering a child's question about why she loves tennis. Tuesday, she's stepping onto the court against one of the toughest in form opponents, she could have drawn. A wild card facing down, an Olympic medalist riding a hot streak. The schedule itself almost accidentally built the entire emotional arc the story revolves around. And underneath all of this narrative texture sits a very real, very concrete season. 24 wins against 15 losses through 2026 so far. Nearly $787,000 in prize money earned this year alone. A career-high ranking of 29 reached back in March. A WTA 125 title claimed just over a week before the story even takes place. The viral, heartwarming framing of the kids' press conference is the visible, shareable layer of who Alex Eala currently is. But underneath that layer is a player who has spent the entire first half of the year quietly converting potential into measurable results, week after week, across multiple surfaces, while staying remarkably consistent in front of cameras, in front of children, in front of trophy presentations. Recognizably the same person no matter which stage she's standing on. So, who do we actually trust to tell us what's going on here? Not some outside analyst offering hot takes, because frankly, there isn't a fresh, credible quote from a pundit specifically about Eala from these recent weeks that would responsibly anchor the story, and manufacturing one just to fill space would undermine the whole point of telling it honestly. The strongest voice available to us is Eala's own. Not pulled from the kids' clip itself, since the WTA only released that as a short video rather than a full transcript, but from her own words at that Birmingham trophy ceremony just over a week earlier. She talked about gratitude. About the trophy representing a step in an ongoing journey rather than some final destination. About staying motivated to keep working. And later that same evening, reflecting on the match itself, she described it as an incredible contest that could have gone either way, crediting a mix of luck and intention for pulling her through. Put those sentences side by side with the kids' press conference clip, and you'll notice something. The voice doesn't change. The disposition doesn't shift depending on the audience. The humility isn't a switch she flips on for cameras. It's simply her default setting, whether she's talking to journalists, addressing a stadium crowd, or answering a child's question about why she loves the sport. And there's a second, smaller signal worth mentioning here too. One that's easy to overlook. Look at how the WTA's own social team chose to caption the segment. Out of hundreds of media day clips produced across a single season, most get fairly standard, formulaic captions. This one got something warmer, something closer to the language reserved for moments the team genuinely felt were worth more attention than the usual content cycle. That's the institution's own quiet tell, an indication that even the people producing this stuff in bulk recognize something different in this particular exchange. Now, let's zoom out one more time and look at what's actually at stake this week. Because Berlin isn't just another stop on the calendar for Eala. It's the highest-tier non-major tournament she's entered as a singles wild card so far in 2026. 6 top 10 players are sharing that draw with her, which functions almost like a built-in measuring stick for how far she's actually come. If she manages to get past Bekic, the road ahead only gets tougher. And looming beyond Berlin is Wimbledon, starting in under 2 weeks, her second appearance in the main draw there, with her seeding status still genuinely uncertain. Beyond that sits the North American hardcourt stretch. The Canadian Open, Cincinnati, and eventually the US Open, played on the surface, she's repeatedly described as feeling most natural to her game. Which means in narrative terms, Berlin represents the final grass court test of an opening half of the season that has already delivered a 4th-round finish at Indian Wells, a points-earning run at the French Open, a title in Birmingham, and a humbling defeat at Queen's. The kids' press conference sits right in the middle of that arc, functioning almost like a human-scale translation of a story that's otherwise being told through rankings, prize money totals, and win-loss columns everywhere else. And it's worth pointing out that the existence of this segment at all carries a broader signal. A Filipino athlete competing in Germany, fielding a sincere question from a German child, with the tour's own media machine building multi-platform content around that single exchange. That's not some regional curiosity buried in a press kit. That's an indication that the tour now treats her as legitimate global content, placed on the same media day rotation as some of the sport's biggest established names. And the audience reaction backed that up. Comments on the WTA's posts trended heavily toward warmth. people repeatedly pointing out how naturally she connected with the child, fans catching and celebrating that shared name coincidence, and Filipino fan accounts in particular sharing the clip not as some minor footnote, but as a genuine moment of representation, a sense of vicarious pride that didn't require a tournament result to justify it. None of that needs a grand viewership statistic to validate it. The reception simply was what it was. Visible, organic, and consistent across different platforms and audiences. Now, I do want to be careful here, because there's a layer of vulnerability sitting underneath this entire story that deserves honesty rather than spin. That Queen's Club loss happened on the 10th of June. A heavy, lopsided defeat against an opponent who had now beaten her twice within a couple of months across 2 different surfaces. Only 4 days separated that result from the kids' press conference. 4 days, 1 travel leg between tournaments, 1 media day appearance, 1 child with an oversized microphone asking a simple question. There's no verified quote from Eala specifically addressing how she felt in the immediate aftermath of that Queen's loss. And inventing one just to round out the emotional arc would be dishonest storytelling. So we're not going to pretend that piece exists. What we can say, based on what was actually captured and shared, is that the version of herself she brought into that Berlin media room wasn't a face visibly guarding a fresh wound. It came across open, present, unguarded in a way that felt consistent with everything else we know about how she carries herself publicly. Whether that openness translates into resilience on match day is something the story can't answer in advance, because that match hadn't been played yet at the time all of this was unfolding. But based purely on the evidence sitting in front of us, poise doesn't appear to be something she's running short on. So, what does all of this actually add up to? You've got a 21-year-old ranked 35th in the world, sitting on a media day stool 8 days removed from holding a championship trophy, 4 days removed from a lopsided defeat, and 2 days away from facing an Olympic medalist on grass. And somehow, across all 3 of those wildly different emotional contexts, the same core disposition keeps showing up. The Birmingham Trophy speech is one face of that consistency. The Queen's Club defeat is another, quieter test of it. And the child holding that oversized microphone might end up being the piece of the story that actually means the most a decade from now, because it's the moment that shows what kind of athlete she's choosing to become when there's no scoreboard attached to the interaction at all. Somewhere in Manila. Somewhere in Berlin. Somewhere on a phone screen, anywhere in between. Kids watching that clip are forming their own early impression of who Alex Eala is, long before most of them will ever fully understand what a WTA ranking means or what a wild card slot represents. And in some small way, that matters just as much as the result of whatever match comes next. A girl who happened to share her name picked up a microphone that was clearly too big for her and asked the one question most adult press conferences somehow never get around to. And the woman sitting across from her, currently 24 wins and 15 losses on the season, closing in on $787,000 in prize money, with the year barely past its halfway point, answered that question on exactly the same level it was asked. That's really the whole story here, stripped of the rankings and the scorelines. If you found this breakdown interesting, the kind of detail that usually gets buried underneath highlight reels and box scores, let me know in the comments what you would have asked her if you'd been the one holding that microphone. And stick around if you want more of these deeper dives into the stories tennis usually doesn't tell on the surface.